Good evening, everyone. How are we doing?
Good.
Good.
Very loud and clear.
A little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Saugatuck, Michigan, not too far from here, for those of you who know. Graduated in 2001, but I entered the delayed entry program in October of 2000. So, just barely 17, still a senior, still in school. But yeah, I decided that I wanted to join the Army. College wasn't for me, but I knew I wanted to get away from home for a little while. So I felt the Army was the best thing for me, and it definitely was the best thing for me. I graduated in May of 2001 and left for basic training in July of 2001. So didn't have much of a senior summer before I left, but probably for the better. Who knows? Maybe I would have changed my mind if I had some more time to think about it. But no, left no issues, no worries, except for my parents' worries. So started basic training July 17th of 2001. Basic training was normal. Everything was going good, and then September 11th happened. Changed the course of the U.S. military for the next 20 years. And that happened to be my entire career, was during the GY era. So it's pretty wild. After basic training, everything was still kind of crazy. Went to airborne school in October of 2001. There any other paratroopers in the audience tonight? You're welcome. Because I enlisted as a parachute rigger, so all those jumps you made, and the parachutes opened. I can't speak on the landings. I don't have any control of that. Yeah. So graduated from airborne school, and then in November of 2001 to February 2002, obviously went to AIT at Fort Lee, Virginia. Be a parachute rigger. No issues there. Obviously, I can pack my own parachute. That's our first test, so that went very well. February 2002, I got my first duty assignment with the 82nd Airborne down at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. That's between them and the 101st. Those are the big airborne divisions that you always hear about. I mean, there's plenty of others. There's riggers all over the world, but yeah, Fort Campbell, 101st, which they aren't airborne anymore, but 82nd will continue to be airborne. But that's where I was. That's where I spent my first 7.5 years. 7, something like that. So. A couple months after I got to Fort Bragg and got into my unit, we had our first deployment come up to Afghanistan. That was in the early days of Afghanistan. Right when 5th Group first went over there to try and catch Bin Laden, capture Mazar-e-Sharif. If anybody's seen the movie 12 Strong, it's a great movie about what those special forces soldiers went through to try and help the states. You hear me all right back there, sir?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So while I was in the 82nd, I missed that first deployment, but I really believe that things happen for a reason. There was nothing bad that happened to those guys over there, but had I been deployed for those first 6 to 12 months, I forget what that rotation was, but they came home, but I got duty positions and jobs while they were gone that maybe I wouldn't have gotten if I were gone, and kind of set me up for later in my career. But yeah, while I was in the 82nd, I was a parachute packer. I was a inspection squad team leader and a shakeout tower team leader. So for Jason and Bruce, if you ever had to shake parachutes, I was probably the that little snot-nosy four that was telling me what to do. Yeah. So April 2007, got my next job with the United States Army Special Operations Command. So going to a smaller unit, but having a much bigger, I guess, arms reach in combat operations. Got there, I was the new guy for a solid year until we got some other guys in. I learned more things. July 2008, I actually went to Iraq, but we covered Iraq a few weeks ago. So, but my positions in Afghanistan were fairly similar to the positions that I was doing in Iraq. So we can skip over. My first deployment to Afghanistan was in June of 2010, and I went to Bagram Air Base, which is, I guess, center east of the country, right there. Big air base. It's been operating for a long time before I got there, and well, it's not operational anymore, but it was for the entire time. Big base, lots going on, but even with as many people that were there for so long, there were still dangers right outside, minefields that hadn't been cleared, which made big problems for people going out. Which there was one time during that deployment, a couple folks tried to sneak over the walls there, and they had to have been dealt with. So, but yeah. So my role in Bagram was more of a logistical role. I did a little bit with parachutes, and I actually worked with a handful of guys that I knew from the 82nd. They had a big team there, and they were doing airdrops, food, water, ammunition, medical supplies. So I'd go and link up with them for a day or so, give them a little hand. The big method of delivery was CDS, which stands for the Container Delivery System. So, 500-pound bundles of food, water, anything you could think of, anybody that troops out there needed, we would deliver. What I did with my unit was we were the central hub for our unit back home, so we would get pallets and big containers at least twice a month. We'd have to pick those up on the airfield, bring them in, take them down, or break them down, repackage them, and then send them out to all the outstations we supported. So we had Kandahar down south, Jalalabad way to the east, Kunduz way up north, and then Mazar-e-Sharif. And Mazar-e-Sharif is where the folks from 5th Special Forces Group actually, that was the main city that they were trying to get to with the Afghan, I don't know if it was the Afghan army, rebel armies, people, Afghanis that were trying to take their country back. So, outstations. So part of my duties, aside from logistical roles, were maintaining oxygen equipment. If any of my guys had to make any really high altitude jumps, which was fairly common due to the terrain, lots of mountains up north. And that was another reason CDS was such a major resupply option in that area. Just the roads weren't paved like they are here. A lot of mountain roads, very tricky to navigate. So airdrop was a major lifeline for everybody over there. I was glad to be a part of that. I also, if we had people coming in from the States or from other countries or from other parts of Afghanistan, I would meet them at the aircraft, make sure they had rooms, lodging, let them know where the food was. That was, everybody wanted food over there, especially after, 8, 9 hours in an aircraft and just tired, wanted something to drink, wanted something to eat, and wanted some place to lay down. So we took care of that for them. Yeah, worked a lot of nights over there, which was somewhat good because we didn't have to deal with the extreme heat. There were some days that we had to either stay up late in the day or get up earlier in the afternoon. But for the most part, when we worked nights, things were a little bit more quiet then, but not as much. So yeah, that was my time in Bagram. And if anybody's got any questions or if they want to ask anything during, please raise your hand, stand up, let me know. I don't have a lot to cover here. I played a fairly small role in a fairly small unit. So we did our plane deloading and everything like that, and that was our deal. It was me and an ammo guy and me and a supply guy, and we were helping out our guys. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, when we hear about what happened in Afghanistan under President Biden,
Okay.
how close were you to where all of that happened? Where the Bagram was one of the issues that they did not want to give Bagram back to the Afghanis. President
Right.
Trump
So.
wasn't going to do that, but I'm curious, how close would you have been to all of that happened?
Well, I was right there on Bagram Airfield. So just.
Where would the wall and all that have been? I mean, it was very.
It's all around. So the air base was protected by big pesco barriers. So big bags filled with sand and rock and concrete, and then had barbed wire, concertina wire all around the top. But the entire airfield was surrounded by those barriers, and had guard posts all around as well. So, but yeah, it's a fairly big base considering it's a base in Afghanistan. Bagram and Kandahar Air Base were the biggest ones there, and that's where the majority of all the aircraft coming in from the States and from other countries flew into. They had smaller aircraft that would do supply runs and things like that to all the smaller outstations up there. But I was definitely at Bagram where all of that was happening. The famous photo of General Donahue, being the last American onto the aircraft in the middle of the night. That was at Bagram Airfield.
You mentioned the oxygen equipment for high altitude jumps. What altitude would that be considered high altitude?
So I believe oxygen is necessary for jumps over 17,000 feet. So when you get way up north and you get those big mountains, 17,000 above sea level isn't that high, but 17,000 or above ground, 17,000 above ground is way up there. So me personally, I've jumped from 25,000 feet AGO. Never in country. It was all training jumps back home, but yeah, 17,000 above, you're going to want oxygen. And when you're flying in mountains, they're going to have to fly real high. Sean will be able to tell you probably more of the capabilities of the C-130s and things like that, on how far or how high they can actually fly. But yeah, anything 17 above ground or above sea level, jumpers need oxygen. So hypoxia. all that. Yes, sir.
Could you tell us what job or task you were most proud of when you were there? And probably a follow-up question, what did you learn the most from that you were able to use when you came back to the States?
job that I was most proud of over there was really, I mean, my whole career was supporting the warfighter, so it didn't change in Afghanistan. It was just a smaller group of warfighters, and small groups like that, when they need food, when they need water, when they need ammunition, when they need anything, we get calls. Thankfully, I had guys there before me that kind of prepped me for it, like, hey, have this and this ready to go, have this and this ready to go, because you never know. You may get a call and say, hey, there's an aircraft leaving in an hour. We need 20 cases of MREs and a whole pallet of water. We've got guys stuck on a mountain, and they're going to be there for a little while because of weather, because of enemy fighting forces, things like that. So yeah, bringing those guys back home, hydrated and not hungry was a big thing for me. I guess something that I brought home from that job was I guess a little bit more work ethic and sense of urgency to have things done. And sense of urgency or being impatient might go a little bit hand in hand, but that's the conditions we were in, and that's the mission we had to accomplish. So there was no failure, or else people were going to die.
Thank you.
So Bagram in 2010, later the next year, October 2011, I was in a much smaller camp right outside the city of Kunduz. So we probably only had about 100 people in our small base there, and we had a small airfield there. There was a big National Guard compound. I was there with Special Operations, Army Rangers, and there may have been agency folks there, but I don't think I saw them too much. So that deployment was a much tougher deployment for me personally. Nothing bad happened there, but my hours and everything else were very rough. So I was even more logistical and even more on my own during that rotation. So I was in charge of coordinating with the Air Force and also some ground forces when supply runs came. So if we had people or equipment that had to go out, I had to put in a few requests, and if there was ammo on board, then it made the request a little bit harder. But I put requests in. I had a giant calendar of all the aircrafts that were coming in, and who was coming in, what was coming in, and I had a small team of National Guard soldiers that would drive trucks for me. And but yeah, there were the aircrafts didn't stop, and they couldn't. So the reason that deployment was so much rougher on me is I didn't have a work schedule. If there was an aircraft coming in, I needed a few hours before to prep and a few hours afterwards to download, to get all the equipment, moved to the right people, everything like that. And yeah, it really took a lot out of me. I think after I left Kunduz, I think my replacement and we were up doing our handover for 36 hours straight, getting him up to speed on everything that was going on, making sure his emails were set up, all in the meantime doing inventory of everything that I was signed for, and also receiving all the aircraft that were coming in, and still doing the normal job. So that was a tough one. 36 hours straight there. I think when I got back to Bagram and had a chance to sleep, I slept for 22 hours straight. When I woke up, I didn't know where I was, didn't know what day it was. I knew what time it was, but I had a watch on. But yeah, other than that, it was a kind of a crazy 4 months. Which also being with USASOC, we did shorter rotations over there, so I didn't, I got lucky and didn't have to do the 12 to 15 month rotations that a lot of other people did. So I was thankful for that, but I definitely put my time in over there. So, yeah, one thing that I remember specifically about that rotation was the temperature. Being so far up north, I was over there during the winter months, and it got cold. We got snowed on, and I did a lot of work outside. So, we had good cold weather gear, but didn't always work out the best. I remember having to try and rub my feet together for a good 20 to 30 minutes to get them warmed up before I could even go to bed. And something that sticks with me now is all I can think about is Afghanistan whenever my feet are cold and I'm in bed. So yeah, it was pretty wild. I wish I had some more for you guys. So that was my first 10 years in the Army. So all my deployment experience happened in the first half. My second half, I only had one deployment where I split time in between Germany and Central Africa. So I was in Niger there. We had a small outpost in the capital, Niamey, and then all of our guys were in a very small town called Arlit, which was probably in the South Sahara region of Africa, southwest, I would say. So, but yeah, I would fly down there for about 2 weeks at a time, bringing all kinds of equipment. I think the funnest thing I ever did going to Africa, I got a call. They had a cook at that station. And he emailed me, and I talked to him on the phone for a bit, and he's like, "Hey, the guys really want Taco Tuesday down here." Okay, all right, let me see what I can do. So he sent me a list of things they wanted, and yeah, I went to the commissary on Ramstein Air Base, and probably got about $600 worth of taco supplies in between ground meat, salsa, cheese, sour cream, anything you could think of. Had to freeze most of it, pack it away in really good coolers, ice, everything like that. And then hopefully it survived the 4-day trek from Germany down to Africa, and then it had to get flown to where they were. It's pretty remote location, but everything made it. They had a great Taco Tuesday, probably had tons of leftovers, so that was a lot of fun. But yeah, so my times in Iraq and Afghanistan were fairly short, but very busy. Thankfully, I walked away unscathed, and here I am, 20-some years later, retired as a first sergeant. Did another stint with the 82nd after my USASOC time, and my last 2 years were with the Special Forces again. So,
You mentioned you were in Iraq. What can you tell us about Iraq? Okay, whichever.
What were we doing in Central Africa?
my guess would be, taking care of terrorist cells. I forget the names of the cells down there that they were collecting intel on, and striking if need be. But yeah, that's what we were doing there.
What year was that?
That was in 2014.
Now Iraq. Tell us about Iraq a little bit.
So Iraq, I was doing the same things, you know, and that was my first deployment, so I really had no idea what was going on. I got a little bit of a train up before I left, and I had another parachute rigger country that showed me the ropes a little bit, but I think we only had about 3 days worth of a handover. And again, it was me and 2 other guys, an ammunition guy and a supply guy. We were the central hub for Iraq for our unit. So same things, aircraft coming in from the United States with you know, big containers, pallets that we'd have to break down, vehicles, things like that. But yeah, the one thing I remember about Iraq is, you know, I got there in the middle of the night, and you know, did a little bit with my replacement, or the guy I was replacing. Got up the next afternoon, walked outside to take a shower, and I had never, you know, been subjected to 125-degree heat until that day. You know, I walked out to the shower trailer to take a shower, and I walked right back inside. I was like, I don't need a shower right now. I'm okay. It's way too hot outside. I'm good. And you know, all the showers were ran by, you know, standing water tanks. So all that water was 125 degrees too. So it was too hot. You know, I think I ended up grabbing a water bottle and a washcloth, and it's kind of getting the travel smell off me, and then off to work I went.
Yeah, how bad was the language barrier there? Did you have a problem with communication to being attaché? You had to talk to a lot of people, I'm sure.
Yeah, they're, you know, the local nationals that worked on the base, you know, some of them spoke a tiny bit of English, enough to get by, you know, enough we could communicate and get things done. There were a lot of interpreters there as well, in all the locations I was at, but yeah, it wasn't easy, you know.
Yeah, I'll bet.
You know, you know, when I was up in Condos, we had a local national there that helped give us things for the camp that we needed, and you know, mattresses were a big thing for the guys, but the only mattresses we could get were, you know, I say memory foam, but they didn't really remember anything. After about 2 weeks of laying on them, it remembered your body shape, and that was about it. And then they were flattened out, and you know, we went through quite a few of those. So, you know. But yeah, language barrier was tough. There were guys over there that.
Well, not even just the Europeans and stuff, you know, there were so many different people there.
Oh yeah. Bagram and Kandahar had, you know, multinational forces there. Canadians, Brits, French. Who else was there when I was there? Obviously the Americans.
Yeah, I ran into a Dutch guy.
Yep. Handful of folks from Germany in a few spots. Yeah.
Did your skills that you learned in the service transfer over when you came out of the service into what you do now? Or?
Not really, no. You know, I decided when I was retiring that packing parachutes and jumping out of airplanes
Was not your thing?
wasn't for me anymore. I enjoyed the heck out of it while I did it, but yeah, a lot of the guys that I worked with found jobs in the civilian side of parachute rigging, and you know, it's great for them. Just wasn't for me. You know, my work ethic from the Army is what transferred over with me and what sticks with me now. So.
Have you done any traveling since you were in those countries that encourage you to do traveling, you know, other places in the world, or stayed pretty much here afterwards?
I traveled a lot for work, mainly within the continental United States, but I do enjoy traveling. I don't know that I ever want to go back to Iraq or Afghanistan. And, I mean, you know, parts of it, beautiful country. When I was in Condos, you know, we had a beautiful mountain landscape all around us. And you know, I did take some pictures, but over the years with new phones and new computers, everything kind of got lost. But you know, they're still up here, so I still remember. Anybody else?
Just one quick one. From your perspective, when you were up in Condos, up in the north there, so that was kind of a main hub for that area with, I would assume, outposts that the guys were working. Like, how many outposts did you support when stuff would come in and you're breaking it down and you're either sending it out on kilos or trucks or whatever? Like, how many are up in that area?
So when I was in Condos, I was only supporting the camp that I was at.
Okay.
When I was at Bagram, when I was at Bagram, I supported all of them. So Kandahar, Mez, Condos, Jalalabad. So all those around, you know, Bagram was our central hub when we were there. So that's, you know, we supported the country as far as our unit and, you know, anybody that was attached with our unit.
Gotcha. And then follow-on question, the difference between, you know, a lot of folks that haven't been over there and they just kind of see it on a map, if you haven't done any study or kind of see it, the difference between the war and the two locations. Can you talk about just kind of the difference from a ground guy's perspective on terrain or culture, or just anything that you noticed with your interaction either with the Indij folks yourself, or when folks would come back behind the wire and they'd talk about one versus the other? Was there a big cultural difference between the two, or just a different war? What were the differences between the two theaters?
So being in Bagram, there wasn't a ton going on in the surrounding area. Up in Condos is where, you know, the guys had the most targets. Small villages in the area, you know, they had lots of intel folks over there, talking with the locals, getting anything and everything they could to help find the bad guys. And but yeah, as far as travel from Condos, lots of helicopters. That was it really. We didn't get too many of the big aircraft coming in. We had the UH-60 Blackhawks, CH-47 Chinooks. They would come in. Occasionally they would do just regular ground vehicles, but the terrain up north was rough. So you know it was hard taking those big trucks out and about all the time. So yeah, we relied heavily on air assets. But yeah, as far as locals, we had a few that worked in our chow hall up north, and then our local supply guys that would get us things. But yeah, I didn't have too much interaction with locals. You know, really just seeing them here and there. You know, our chow hall guys, you know, they had locals working for them, and then our engineers and mechanics also had a handful of guys working with them as well, just building things, fixing trucks, stuff like that. But yeah, so yeah, I played a non-combat role, even though I was supporting the war fighters. Never shot my rifle overseas. Thankful about that. Never was in a position where I had to. Also thankful about that. So, well, thank you very much.